Watch collecting for me has always been a bit of a journey, one that has a ton of different directions you can go, all of which are filled with their own individual twists and turns, some of which lead to pleasant surprises, and others unfortunately lead to depressing mistakes. It really can get confusing at times, and especially for newcomers. So I thought it'd be useful to share some rules I've developed that help keep me on the straight and narrow. And these are rules I've developed from not only my own experiences, but the ones you've all shared with me over the years. So this video is really more geared towards those newcomers, but seasoned veterans feel free to watch as well and comment on your own rules down below. And remember, sometimes rules are meant to be broken. So some of these are more best practices than must follows. These aren't in any particular order, but number one is a pretty important one, and that's never go into debt to buy a watch. Now, I'm not talking Dave Ramsey, credit cards are evil kind of debt. I'm just saying don't buy anything unless you can pay it off at the end of the month. And the reason for that is pretty simple, and that's that very few people in this world actually need a watch. A lot of us want them, but most of us don't need them. Which means that in some ways, every watch, even a $20 Casio, is kind of a luxury item. And you really shouldn't go into long-term debt for something you don't need. It just makes the watch much more expensive to own in the long run. And if you have to, think about it that that's money you could spend on another watch. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm just as guilty as the next guy in terms of breaking this rule, but it's still the smart thing to do. Which brings us to number 2. Never spend money on a watch you can't afford to lose. There's a very similar saying when it comes to gambling, and I think that applies here as well. Now, originally this rule was more applied towards Kickstarters and AliExpress watches, just because with those, there's more of a risk, and if something goes south, you're basically SOL. However, recently I've been thinking that this might apply to every watch, and I think this is especially important to think about if you're considering getting into the luxury game. Because watches really aren't meant to be safe queens. They're meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be worn out in the real world. And the real world is chaotic. It's messy. It's unpredictable. Life happens. So even if you always plan to play it safe, there's always a remote chance something bad's gonna happen and you'll be out of watch. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not trying to scare you about what you should wear, and I'm not telling you should never buy an expensive watch. What I'm saying here is that you should never consider a watch to be a reliable investment. So if you have a major purchase coming up, say you're thinking of buying a new house next year, and even if you get that call from your AD and they tell you your name's up on the wait list, don't go spend a big chunk of your savings on a Rolex or a Royal Oak, just thinking you're going to sell it later on to help fund your down payment, because that may not go as you plan. So when it comes to major financial decisions, just play it smart here. Now, let's move away from the finance stuff for a bit and talk about style. So for rule number 3, I have don't be afraid to try something different. Now, years ago, when I first started getting into watches, the watches I would buy and wear were pretty predictable. Mostly dive and field watches that had a blue or black dial, and I think all of them were 42mm. It's pretty standard stuff, so I'm sure some of you can relate. Yet now, if I go and look at my favorite watches, I don't think a single one of them fit that description. In fact, most of them are pretty unique when it comes to their designs. I've realized that I really love and embrace those things that are a bit different. And that's something I never would have realized if I hadn't occasionally stepped out of my comfort zone and tried something different. So, you never know till you try. Number 4 is never buy a watch to impress someone else. If you're thinking about buying something, buy it because you like it and because you want it, not because you think someone else will like it or they'll be impressed by it. Now, there is one exception to this rule, and that's if you're someone whose career has you dealing with high-end clients. And if that's the case, you may need to look and act a certain part. And if that's you, then yeah, that is something you need to consider. But for everyone else, no. And that's just because the truth is that the vast majority of people out there just couldn't care less what you're wearing. Heck, most of them think you're strange for not wearing an Apple Watch. And if they are looking at your wrist, then they don't know anything about what you have. Over the years, my wife has received far more compliments on her quartz Shinola and Phoebus than on anything I've ever worn. So again, if you're buying something, buy it only because you want it and you like it. Anything else, and you're just wasting your time. And along the same lines, we have rule number 5, and that's that it's okay to like or hate what you're not supposed to. If you spend any amount of time in watch groups or forums or even YouTube channels, you'll soon realize we're a pretty opinionated bunch. Yet, despite the frequent arguments, there are a few brands and a few watches the majority of the community actually agree upon. For example, Invicta and Shinola. Most people will tell you they're crap, they're horrible, and you should avoid them at all costs, despite most people not actually having any real experience with them. Or if you ask someone about an Omega Speedmaster, most people love it, and they'll tell you that it should definitely be one of your grails, even if they've never actually seen one in real life. Now, regardless of whether or not those opinions are from groupthink, actual experience, or just a consensus among enthusiasts, you're an individual. You can think for yourself. You don't have to like the same things or hate the same things as everyone else. It's okay. A long time ago, I bought a Daytona homage. And I bought it because the Daytona is supposed to be one of your grail watches. It's a design that everyone loves. Yet, I never warmed up to it. And that wasn't because it's an homage, and it wasn't because of the quality. It was because of the design. Later on, I realized it was because I don't like chronographs with 3 subdials. I prefer the more beautiful symmetry of a bicompact or 2 subdial chrono. And because of that, I have very little interest in ever getting a Daytona or a Speedmaster, despite everyone telling me that's what I should want. I learned that it's just not me. Number 6, always watch 2 reviews before buying anything. This is just a general rule I have and something I recommend for everyone. So even if you have a trusted favorite watch reviewer, go watch another review as well. It's just going to cost you time. And there are a couple of reasons I recommend this. The first of which is that even the most competent reviewer doesn't always catch everything. So it's always good to get a second opinion and see if they say something different. It's also a good way to see another colorway of that watch, and that might help you decide which one you want. And lastly, taking a little bit more time to think about it is never a bad thing. It can help you decide if it's something you really want versus something that was just an impulse buy. Number 7, and this is one I've told a lot of people over the years, and that's simply trust your gut. Say you're really on the fence about a watch, that you love almost everything about it except for just one thing. Then just trust your gut. If your gut is telling you that little thing is going to annoy the heck out of you, it's just best to play it safe and move on. Don't stress and drive yourself crazy about it. There are plenty of other watches out there. Number 8, and this is if you're buying a watch secondhand from someone online. And if that's the case and you're using Venmo or PayPal to pay for it, then never, ever, and I cannot stress this enough, use the friends and family option. Always use goods and services. Yes, PayPal is filled with some greedy bastards, but that's the seller's problem, not yours. It's always in your best interest to do so, and it's the only way you have any sort of protection if something goes wrong. The only time I'd say it's okay to use friends and family is if it's actually someone you consider to be a friend. Say it's someone you've had multiple transactions with, someone you chat with all the time online, someone you trust. Then it's okay. But other than that, don't do it. And just as important, if the person you're buying the watch from specifically asks you to use friends and family, then don't run away from that deal. It's just a bad sign. On to rule number 9, buy low, sell high, which I know should be obvious, but it's not always, and especially when we get obsessed with something. At that point, we're not thinking clearly, and this is probably the rule I break the most, but a lot of that is just because I'm buying some watches when they first come out for the channel. But even if you think this is dumb, let me put this another way. If you buy something at a great price, say well below market value, and you decide to sell it later on, then at that point, do you not only have a better chance of breaking even, which is always a nice thing to happen, but you also don't have to wait for that one specific person who's willing to give you what you need to get out of that watch. You have more of a range of options that you can pick from about who and when you need to sell it. and still be able to come out where you need to. Another way to say it is you make money when you buy, not when you sell. And finally, we have what I think is the most important rule to remember, and that's that all of this is a marathon, not a race. Now, all of us in this hobby have found ourselves in some sort of buying spree at one point or another, but I think it's much more common with newcomers, where right after they take that first deep dive into that rabbit hole, they start going on forums, they start going on Facebook groups, they watch one video after another talking about the latest, greatest watch that they have to own, as well as all those recommendations about what watch you need to have a real collection. And they wind up with all these ideas that they need a pilot's watch, they need a dress watch, they need this diver or that diver. And all of this is despite the fact that a few months earlier, they had never even owned a watch before. And in a very short amount of time, they wind up with a ton of watches and they've spent a ton of money, as well as possibly gained some wife aggro in the process. I've seen it happen time and time again. But here's the thing you need to remember. If you got a watch on your wrist, you're already in the club. This hobby's not always about buying stuff. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I view this hobby as more of a journey than something to any particular destination. So regardless of where you want your particular journey to take you, enjoy the ride. Take your time. Take a breath. Watch a few videos. Enjoy the learning process. Maybe live vicariously through someone else. And after that, when you're ready to buy your next watch, just think about what you really want. And with that, you have Relative Time's 10 rules for watch collecting. Yes, I just referred to myself in third person. But even with that, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you maybe learned something. And as always, let me know what you think about this down below, as well as what are your rules for watch collecting. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel, as it kind of lets the algorithm know other people might like this video as well. As always, I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.